Here are 7 key elements of codependency recovery so that you can start to heal yourself. Because codependency is complex. It's like a tree with many branches. It can impact everything. And I don't want that for you. So in this video, I'm going to share 7 key elements of a good, strong codependency recovery so that you can start to heal yourself and your relationships. And be sure to stay until the end because I'm going to give you a bonus tip on what I wished I would have done much earlier in my own recovery that actually made a huge difference. But if you're new here, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So codependency recovery is basically a process of unlearning dysfunctional behaviors that we learned growing up and learn how to create healthy, mutually satisfying relationships without sacrificing yourself in the process. Now that's a tall order because in codependency recovery, you're not only working on your relationships, which is actually the sexy fun part because most of us are addicted to relationships. I know I have been in the past and sometimes still can be. So in codependency recovery, we're looking at 2 things. We're looking at our relationships and we're looking at the relationship we have or don't have with ourselves. And that's why this process is so complex because there's so many layers to it. So what does codependency recovery even mean? It basically is a process of unlearning dysfunctional behaviors that we probably learned in childhood and instead learning how to create mutually satisfying relationships without sacrificing yourself in the process. So the first key element is to build a healthy relationship with yourself. This is key because this is going to decrease your dependency on other people, which is the hallmark of codependent relationships. In codependent relationships, we tend to cling to them. We want their love and approval so badly because we don't know how to give it to ourselves. So the missing link is to build that solid relationship and connection with yourself. And that is going to be super helpful. And honestly, I wish I would have done this earlier in my recovery because it made such a huge difference. But it's not sexy. I wanted to heal my relationships much more than I wanted a relationship with myself. If you agree, hit yes in the comments because you're not alone. I'm right there with you. Now, the second element is you need to be able to assess your relationships because most of us go into codependency recovery wanting to help and fix and change our relationships. They're very painful because when they're one-sided, we get the short end of the stick. So to assess your relationships, you really need to assess what's working and what isn't. And that's what my relationship checklists are going to help you with. I'll link them in the comments. Because basically you need to see, is this relationship worth saving or do the negatives far outweigh the positives? Now that doesn't mean you need to leave the relationship, but that's really important information because when you're assessing your relationships, you're assessing whether or not they're going to be worth keeping. So for instance, if you're in a toxic relationship right now with a narcissistic person or an alcoholic or someone who's abusive or mean to you, you may have to practice more detachment and self-care until you're ready to leave that relationship. So assessing your relationships is going to be key in codependency recovery because eventually you're going to want to build healthy relationships and you need to know whether or not your current relationships are salvageable. The next key in codependency recovery is to set boundaries in your relationships. This is key because every relationship we have needs boundaries or else we become the doormat. And that's what happens when you're codependent. You say yes when you mean no. You want to be helpful. You'll do whatever you can to be loved and to get that love and approval. But the problem is that you're not asking for anything and you're not putting your needs out there. And part of what boundaries do is that they help us honor our own values and our own needs. So for instance, if you need more time alone and you're not getting it, or you need to be treated better. Those are very specific boundaries that you can do for yourself. Even if the other person isn't going to comply, you can decide what you participate in and what you don't, which is why boundaries are super powerful in codependency recovery. Now, if you can relate to what I'm talking about so far, say ditto in the comments because you're not alone. I'm right there with you. So the next key in codependency recovery is to feel your own feelings. This is key because as codependents, we're very sensitive, we're very empathic, and we tend to feel other people's feelings instead of our own. If you're codependent, You're probably really good at detecting what other people are feeling, but you're not great at understanding what you're feeling. Because when we're externally focused, we lose that connection to ourselves. And part of why we do that is because we're trying to stay safe. Part of what's happening, at least for me, is that I think if I can just fix somebody else's pain, then I'm going to be okay. The problem is that's a really big responsibility. And if I feel somebody else's pain, I actually feel super overwhelmed and anxious. So a good starting point is to start focusing on what you feel emotionally, what's going on in your own body, because your body is where your feelings get stored. And if you just start paying attention to your own bodily reactions, that's going to help you start to feel your own feelings rather than being externally focused on what someone else is feeling. I know for me, I assume somebody's mad at me a lot of the time when most of the time they're not. I check it out and they say, no, I'm just stressed out, or no, I'm just really worried about this other thing. So when we feel somebody else's feelings, we also make dangerous assumptions, like they don't like us, or they're going to be mad if I set a boundary. We assume the worst when nothing's actually happened yet. The next key in codependency recovery is to address and identify enabling and controlling behaviors. Now, to me, enabling behaviors is doing for others what they should be able to do for themselves. But we want to help, we want to fix, we want to make things easier for other people because we have big hearts. And all of that is lovely, but the problem is it sets us up to feel overwhelmed and anxious because we're doing too much. We're taking responsibility for somebody else's life instead of being focused on our life. Now, in terms of control issues, you may be trying to change the narcissistic person's behavior, trying to get them to be empathetic and not be abusive. Or you might be trying to stop someone from drinking or yelling at you. Or you might be trying to control the outcome because that's how you think you're going to be safe. But let's face it, none of us have control. We only have control over ourselves and our own actions. And actually realizing that is a huge relief in codependency recovery. Now, the next key element in codependency recovery is finding the right support. This is key because no one is going to be able to recover in isolation. It's way too difficult. It's like asking the alcoholic who's drunk to get sober while they're drunk. There's no way. The best thing I ever did for my own codependency recovery is attend Al-Anon meetings, because that immediately gave me a group of people, structure in the steps and traditions to do my healing on myself and my relationships. Now, some other ideas are you could pick a therapist that specializes in codependency, or a life coach, or you could do CODA, which is Codependence Anonymous. Codependence Anonymous and Al-Anon are both free 12-step programs that have lots of meetings on Zoom still because of the pandemic. So those are really easy ways to access support today. Because if you have enough support, you're going to be able to do this for the long haul. Because codependency recovery is not something we can do in a couple of months. This typically takes years. And it's much easier to go through this process if you have a tribe of people supporting you. So the next key element of recovery is doing your family of origin work. This often requires seeing a therapist or a group therapy situation where you have very structured support, because this is deeper work. This is where you're connecting your present pain to your past experiences. And this often includes looking at childhood issues like abuse or trauma that you've suffered that you really need extra help in. But I'm going to tell you something with this is you don't have to start with this one. In fact, many people don't, because this is the heavier, deeper work that can be very draining emotionally, especially if you don't have enough support. But this is a key element in recovery because we need to be able to go back to our childhood and heal what we can heal so that we can forgive ourselves and move forward. And this is where you're going to get some really big changes, because as I looked at my childhood and really started to clean up the past and feel the grief of my childhood, that's when I started to feel more like the adult, not the child. So that's really important, exciting work, but it's also very emotionally draining. So I really want you to give yourself permission to do that when you're ready to do that. And if you're not ready to do that, that's totally okay. So here's the bonus tip. So what I wish I would have done earlier is I wish I would have spent time building self-trust. That is such a key in codependency recovery, because part of what we do is we look to others for our answers because we don't trust our own perceptions. Often because we've been gaslit as children, meaning that parents, caregivers denied our reality and made us feel crazy for being hurt, for feeling the pain. Maybe we were the truth teller growing up. It's really important to be able to unwind from that experience and to build that self-trust. And honestly, this is something I only recently did, probably the last 5 to 10 years in my recovery. I was so focused on healing my relationships that I didn't realize that I still wasn't trusting myself. I still wasn't really looking at my own intuition. And that's where my self-trust journal can really help. And I'm going to leave the link in the comments to that too. Can't wait to hear what you have to say about where you're at in your own recovery. Thanks so much.